Welcome to The Hypnotist, the show that gives you inside access to cutting-edge hypnosis with real clients facing genuine issues. Brought to you by the hypnotherapist demanded by celebrities, CEOs, and even royalty, Adam Cox. These recordings took place live from Adam's clinic in London's world-famous Harley Street. This podcast features powerful hypnosis, so do not listen while driving or operating machinery. This recording is not suitable for those with epilepsy or severe mental health issues. So, get yourself comfortable and enjoy today's episode of The Hypnotist.
Hi, it's Adam here, and on today's episode of The Hypnotist, I'm joined by a guest hypnotist. We're here with Ronia Fraser. Welcome to the show, Ronia.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
So, Ronia, we knew each other for a few years before we started seeing each other at conferences, but there'll be a lot of people listening that aren't familiar with you. So give us a quick intro to who you are. For people that have seen you will see this very striking kind of red hair and the outfits that you wear and those kind of things. But for those that kind of don't really know what you're about, give us a quick intro.
Yeah, so my name is Ronia Fraser, and I'm a multi-award-winning trauma recovery coach and clinical hypnotherapist, and I'm one of the leading experts in the field of narcissistic abuse recovery. And needless to say, you don't end up in this particular line of work. It's very specific, unless it has happened to you. So I'm a survivor of narcissistic abuse myself. And when I was going through my recovery, I got really frustrated with the lack of help that was available because I was really unwell at the time. I was really struggling with my mental health as a result of what had happened to me. And because I got so frustrated with nothing happening, like even though I was going to therapy like every week, I basically went out on this mission to find something that could reverse the damage as effectively as it was caused. And I didn't know what I was looking for. But I knew that something had happened to me. And I just thought, if it goes one way to turn me into this mess, surely there has to be a way it goes the other way. And I went out on this mission to find something. And that's when hypnosis actually came into my life. And I basically made this my career because there's still a lot of disconnect. There is still a lot of challenges when narcissistic abuse survivors are looking for help. It's become this major buzzword, but no help is available. Very little effective help is available. And that's how I then also started doing my public speaking, giving the talk. So not only to help survivors myself with the work that I do, but actually also raising the awareness for professionals, for coaches, for therapists, for medical professionals, to give them the practical tools to help their clients better. And when we met, Adam, I was just starting out, right? I had just written like my first ebook, and you were actually the first person who gave me a platform. I think it was like back in 2017 or something when we first had our first podcast or radio interview.
Yeah, it was in London, good old Share Radio back then. You came into the studio, and I was kind of struck by one, obviously you went through like a very difficult time, and it seemed like almost like the brink, and you got yourself back from that and actually turned it into something very empowering, a mission to help other people. And I think a lot of people in this therapeutic space go through something similar in the sense they go through like a real struggle, and because they've experienced that, they really want to make a difference to other people. But also, since we first met in 2017, this phrase narcissism is everywhere. Someone has a bad breakup, suddenly they're a narcissist, and it's I think clearly there is more awareness of narcissistic abuse, but I also feel like there's a real danger where it's a catch-all term, that if someone is behaving in a way that you don't want, suddenly they're a narcissist, and it's a way to kind of help make sense of things. For those listening that may have heard of this phrase, narcissism or narcissistic abuse, you're the expert here. Give us a definition of what it is, but also what it isn't, because I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, That's the weird thing, right? When we first met, it didn't mean anything. So you were one of the very few people who just acknowledged what I said and then wanted to know more about it. Whereas now it's this buzzword, it's everywhere. As you said, people get labeled as narcissists left, right, and center. I actually just last week I did a piece with the Telegraph where it was about kids having, there's like this TikTok trend, supposedly, I'm not on TikTok, but supposedly there's this TikTok trend where teenagers supposedly get educated about what narcissistic abuse is and how to identify a narcissistic parent, and then they're being advised to cut contact with them. And obviously, as a teenager, you will not agree with your parents' parenting. That doesn't make them a narcissist, right? So it's incredibly dangerous. And the term is getting misused so much because it's being used out of context, which actually does no one any favors, right? So on the one hand, it's a good thing that we talk about it more because people don't get away with what they used to get away with. We're much more aware. Consciously, we can spot the signs, which doesn't mean we're not going to make the same mistake again, because that goes much deeper. But we're much more aware of what behaviors are actually unacceptable, what behaviors are abusive. Whereas before, we would have just brushed it off as like, well, that person is a bit difficult. However, if we, of course, overuse terminology, it desensitizes, right? And people lose interest. And the interesting thing is that we talk about it so much and we are almost at a tipping point where people do lose interest because they don't take it seriously anymore, which very much impacts the people that are actually narcissistic abuse survivors. But then from a professional point of view, that hasn't caught on yet at all. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So narcissistic abuse isn't just breaking up with somebody. It's not just somebody cheating on somebody else or somebody hurting someone's feelings, right? That's not narcissistic abuse. And don't get me wrong, every breakup hurts, obviously. And a broken heart is a horrible thing to experience. However, when we really talk about narcissistic abuse, the symptoms present in a very different way because it has such a profound impact, detrimental impact to the survivor's mental health, to the point where they are literally not functioning in their normal day-to-day life anymore. So it's really not about a broken heart. It's about the impact that narcissistic abuse has. Now, when I talk about narcissistic abuse, I talk about abuse that's perpetrated by somebody who exhibits narcissistic behaviors, narcissistic tendencies. I don't care about a diagnosis. I mean, I'm not a medical professional. I cannot diagnose anyone anyway. But most narcissists that we deal with in our day-to-day life, they won't have a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis. Because if they do, they are already so high up on the spectrum, and, they were like probably caught doing something criminal. And then a psych evaluation was ordered, and that's how they got their diagnosis. But just by the nature of what a narcissist is, they have no self-awareness. It's not like they're going to go like, oh, I think there's something wrong with me. Let me get checked out, So most people that we experience and the people we walk into the trap, they don't have a diagnosis at all. And again, it's not about a broken heart or hurting someone's feelings. Narcissistic abuse is actually psychological and emotional abuse on the most sophisticated level. So what we are talking about is like emotional blackmail, it's systematic brainwash, it's the very calculated erosion of identity. So there's so much more to it. And by labeling anyone a narcissist who doesn't agree with us or hurts our feelings, that really, as I already said, narrows down the experience of what an actual abuse survivor is experiencing, which actually is complex post-traumatic stress.
And I think people also get confused because narcissistic abuse, because they hear the word narcissist and then they hear narcissism, this element of the Greek myth of Narcissus who actually loved himself, so those people that have got high self-esteem, and maybe they are on social media and they like the validation of other people, quite often that's linked to what a narcissist is, rather than, perhaps some of the more insidious or kind of calculating kind of approaches. And I think you've mentioned a few things there, but gaslighting is kind of one of the, let's say, kind of approaches that may be used in narcissistic abuse. And it's such a sneaky thing, because the moment someone questions what's real and what isn't real, then they become heavily dependent on the person that is giving them that information. In the women, or I'm assuming it's more of a female bias, but in the people that you work with that are recovering from narcissistic abuse, how prevalent is gaslighting in the kind of the form of the abuse that they've experienced, or is that actually overrepresented culturally? We think it's more kind of significant than maybe it actually is.
Gaslighting is very, very common in narcissistic abuse. It's one of the main tactics that a narcissist will use. But gaslighting also falls into the same labeling that it's so overused at this point. And like in normal conversations, you nowadays will hear something like, "Stop gaslighting me." Well, that person didn't gaslight you. They just didn't agree with what you said. That's a very, very different thing than intentionally distorting your reality to such an extent that you think you're losing your mind. Completely used out of context. And gaslighting, I think in 2022, it was even word of the year, right? So the awareness, again, has significantly increased. But then as a result of that, it's been used out of context many, many times. For an actual narcissistic abuse survivor, gaslighting is absolutely detrimental, because it's the abuser not only invalidating your experience, right? They also will distort the reality to such an extent that all of a sudden everything you think you remember doesn't seem to be true anymore. And when this starts out, it's quite subtle, and it will go something along the lines of, "Oh, I can't believe you said that. I can't believe you did that." And then you will go like, "What are you talking about? I said that? I did that? Doesn't even sound like me." But because that person who's doing that most likely is the person closest to you, there's no reason to doubt what they say. So you take it as the truth. But of course, the seed is already planted now, right? Because then all of a sudden, we start questioning our memory. We start questioning our reality. And once the person on the receiving end of gaslighting then will go, "Oh, I don't know what's wrong with me. I feel like I'm losing my mind, or I feel like I'm going crazy," the abuser obviously will completely jump onto that narrative and reinforce it. So we feel like we're going crazy. We are told we are going crazy. As a result, we start acting crazy because we are literally losing our mind, because we are being manipulated to act in that way. People around us think we are acting crazy, and that's how the crazy woman becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And of course, it can happen to men as well. And you said it's probably mainly women. Actually, it's not true. My clients, it's like about 50-50, actually. There has been a big change in men coming forward as well.
That's and I love learning about these kind of perception shifts in my mind, because I thought maybe it was like 80-20, like 80% of people suffering from narcissistic abuse would be female, maybe 20% men. To hear that it's closer to 50-50 is surprising. And
well, that's based on the people that come to me for help, right?
Yeah.
And it's just something that has changed over recent years, because for men, I think it's already incredibly difficult for women, because you are just not being believed, right? That's one of the hardest things when we go through this experience. For a man, I think it's even harder to come forward, because there is this disconnect to even imagine that a woman would be able to do something like that, because women are seen as loving and caring and nurturing, right? But then, of course, not all women are like that. And when I wrote my book, I actually wrote a version just for men, because for men, there is nothing out there. There is no resources available. And actually, a lot of professionals now, that do narcissistic abuse recovery coaches, who are female, they actually will refuse to work with men, which to me indicates you haven't actually done your own healing yet.
Wow. Okay.
If you're still being triggered by that. But I think for men, it's even more difficult to find help, because there is this bias. So
Yeah.
but it can happen to anyone. It can happen anywhere. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It can be in the family. It can be a friendship. It can be in the workplace. And it doesn't discriminate against gender. It doesn't discriminate against nationality or age or sexual preference. It really can happen to anyone, at any given time.
And I imagine with certain men, not only have you got the issue of recovering from the narcissistic abuse, but this idea of, because I think a lot of men, when they're on the receiving end of domestic violence, feel a lot more shame, and they can't talk about it because there's this element of, well, a man would never be, receiving end of kind of violence and those kind of things. So it seems like they'd be even more isolated because of the perceptions of other people. And I remember working with a guy that was very, very successful in finance. Seems like, and again, like you, I'm in no position to diagnose, but it seemed like his ex-partner, certainly had narcissistic, kind of tendencies. And one of the tools that she was using was kind of reputation damage. It was kind of like going to all of those kind of shared friends and kind of getting in there first to kind of frame things in a certain way. Is that part of the narcissist playbook, that
Yes.
kind of tool?
Absolutely. And it's that one. I mean, everything that's being used, every tactic that's being used by a narcissist is very calculated and is soul destroying for the person on the receiving end. Now, smear campaigning is very, very common, because obviously what narcissists do is they create this illusion how to be perceived. There are people, what you would call communal narcissists, for example. They are very well respected in their community. They do a lot of good things in their community, but behind closed walls, it's closed doors. It's a completely different story. So as the survivor actually starts speaking up, they will change the narrative and turn it around and turn it against their victim, because at that point the victim really is destabilized, right? Is talking crazy, is acting crazy. The mental health is completely shot. And then, of course, people will naturally listen to the person more that seems to be more stable. And because we at that point have started acting crazy and people believe that we are crazy, it's very easy for the narcissist to just spin a story that fits their narrative. And what it actually does is it completely destroys the community support, because it creates cognitive dissonance for the people, which is basically it's a psychological phenomena where you receive information that doesn't make any sense to what you think you know, and it almost suspends your brain because it just doesn't make any sense. And because the narcissist has created this wonderful perception about themselves, the stories that now all of a sudden come out by the victim don't make sense to the people. So in the very early stages, what will happen, and unfortunately it happens to all of us, it happened to me as well, is that people will turn their backs on the actual victim because they believe what the story the narcissist tells, which obviously is very, very calculated. And when you are going through the darkest time of your life, seemingly without any support, if you are looking for validation, you are looking for people that believe you and listen that this actually has happened, but because it doesn't make sense for those people, they don't. And it comes down to being incredibly soul destroying. It's incredibly isolating, and you're literally going through the darkest time in your life, seemingly all on your own. Now, with smear campaigns, there's literally nothing you can do. So the more you try to prove them wrong, the more you come across as a crazy person. And that just feeds into that whole narrative, right? Being emotionally unstable, and it's very calculated. So with smear campaigning, unfortunately, the only thing that can be done is let it wash through. And what will happen, and that's a guarantee, what will happen is that eventually people will see through the mask, because a narcissist can't keep the mask on forever. And then all of a sudden they start realizing, oh, there is actually more to that, because all of a sudden they saw what's underneath. And then they will come and reconnect. And usually then they're very apologetic, and that they didn't see, that they couldn't help, but they couldn't, they were as caught up in the net of the narcissist as the actual victim themselves. So with the smear campaigning, as painful as it is, unfortunately, all we can do is sit it out. The people that are supposed to be in our lives, they will reconnect, they will come back. Unfortunately, of course, there's a time delay to that. But it will also eliminate the people that actually aren't supposed to be in our lives anymore. If somebody actually doesn't reconnect and doesn't get eventually what has happened, they're not supposed to be in our lives. They're not our tribe. And what also happens is, as we then go through our healing journey and become very authentic in who we are, a lot of those people actually just don't fit anymore, because they're not on the same wavelength. And yeah, so smear campaigns, very, very common, pretty much happens to every single narcissistic abuse survivor.
And we've talked some of the tactics that lead to abuse. What happens if someone figures out, the penny drops? I imagine that, there is this kind of point of realization of, oh shit, this is happening, I need to do something about it. Is that like an epiphany, or is this something like, what was normally the catalyst for someone realizing, given that they have been gaslit, they are questioning reality, they don't know who they can trust and they can't trust? What tends to be the catalyst for the realization? And is that realization, if it is a realization, the beginning of the recovery stage? What's actually happening that gets them to recovery?
So the realization usually happens very late, when it's pretty much a life and death situation. Because there is trauma bonding at play, which is a very complex topic. I give whole lectures just on that, which explains why people that are being abused are staying in the relationship or keep going back. So the realization most likely will not happen while in the relationship. I didn't realize until, I don't even know how long I was already out of the relationship, when I realized, oh, actually, that wasn't me. That was somebody doing this to me. I thought I was the problem. I was living in Hollywood at the time. I thought I was one of LA's fallen angels. I took like all the blame myself for losing my mind. It didn't even occur to me that a person closest to me was doing that to me. So most likely the realization comes afterwards, because once we leave that relationship and we go no contact, our nervous system starts regulating again, and it's like the fog lifts, and all of a sudden we can see clearly. And of course, that is the beginning of the recovery, because we need self-awareness to start with, and that's the only way we can move forward. But unfortunately, when we're talking about abusive relationships, that realization really comes very, very late, where most of the time it's really the case of, okay, am I going to live or am I going to die? And that's a decision that we then make for ourselves. And that's when the survival instinct kicks in.
And when you
So
say
my
live
survival
or
instinct kicked in before I did realize that I was being abused.
yeah, when you say live or die, are we talking like the death can, it leads to accidents? Or are we talking like suicides, that it can go in that direction?
Yes. So we are talking about, something, the perpetrator does something. We are also talking about, which is, I think, much more common, the victim actually doing something themselves. So basically, and it happened to me as well, where my ex-boyfriend would actually get me to a point where I would hate myself so much, but I took it for the truth, where he would, break me down emotionally, and then he would leave knives or box cutters lying around, and for me to do his dirty work. Now, if I had actually done that, and if I had gone through with it, nobody would have batted an eyelid, because everybody thought I was crazy anyway. I was just like this crazy chick from Hollywood, Nobody would have questioned how this actually came to be. Even though some people might have then thought, oh, it's a bit out of character, but crazy woman. Nobody would have questioned that the person actually gave me the tools to do it. And luckily I clocked it, and I called him out on it. But in the moment itself, I didn't even realize the seriousness of the issue. I said to him, take your box cutters because I'm going to use them. And he said, oh, don't be silly. You wouldn't do that to me. And so there was like this part in me that was still sane enough to actually notice that. And I left shortly after because I didn't trust myself. And I knew if I stayed another 4 weeks, I literally would be dead. So that's actually something that needs to be talked about more. And there's a lot of talk and raising awareness about male suicide. No one ever really talks about female suicide. And I think that's something that really needs to be questioned, because many times there is somebody in the background that actually pulls the strings there. And narcissistic abuse has very, very detrimental consequences for the survivor. And as I said, it can literally be a life and death situation.
I think there was a high profile case in the media here in the UK maybe 3-4 weeks ago where the woman that died, she did commit suicide, but there was clearly a long period of abuse that led up to that. And because he wasn't actually the one doing the thing that led to the death directly, I think it was a very mild punishment, if any at all. And it's a weird thing because clearly that was the major factor that led to that person's death.
Yeah. So in the UK, actually, it was last year, 2 years ago, had a case where the coroner actually ruled the cause of death as murder, I think, or manslaughter, something, where the coroner actually put a responsibility on the partner or ex-partner, which was a first. That had never happened before anywhere else in the world before. And I did like a whole press campaign. I put out a press release and everything. Nobody picked it up because nobody wanted to talk about it. It's like one of those topics that really need to be talked about more, but it's just, it's a tricky topic to talk about. And because there is no real evidence, which unfortunately narcissistic abuse survivors always have to deal with because it's invisible. It's a very, very tricky thing. But I think we just need to ask those kind of questions more, like what's actually going on here.
Yeah, I'm looking at the story now, and it seemed like Kiana Dawes was only 23. She took her own life on a railway line, and yeah, the abuse contributed to the woman taking her own life. And it does seem that the years of abuse from a partner led to manslaughter charge, which I think was kind of like fairly rare for it to kind of happen. But luckily they did join the dots in that case.
Well, it should be murder, really, because it's all calculated. And but yeah, so I think that's the second case then, and nowhere else in the world has that happened other than the UK. Like in Germany, for example, I do quite a bit of work in Germany as well. It's not even acknowledged as a crime. Like in the UK, you have coercive control is a crime. It's in the law. Somebody can, go to prison for that. In Germany, it doesn't exist. It's not acknowledged whatsoever.
Wow. So let's say someone's come to the realization that they were a victim of narcissistic abuse. they're starting to retrospectively put the pieces together. What does it take to kind of go on that journey to actually reach a point where they could consider themselves, whether it's healed, recovered, whatever the right phrase is? But I imagine that's not, an overnight thing.
No, it's absolutely not. And it's quite multi-layered as well. And what happens to a lot of narcissistic abuse survivors is that they gain an incredible in-depth knowledge about the topic. Like, I literally haven't met a single one who couldn't write a PhD on narcissists. It's part of the recovery journey, because what happened to us is so out of this world, and we are brainy people. We need to cognitively understand what actually has happened here. So it's a very big part of the recovery journey to understand, okay, so that's a narcissist, that's narcissistic abuse. This actually wasn't my fault. This was done to me. But what also then needs to happen is that you need to come to the realization, you know everything you need to know. And I'm not saying everything there is to know, because with it being this buzzword, somebody comes up with new terminology every single day. Like, when people always send me stuff like, have you seen this? Have you heard about this? I'm like, I don't care. There is a point where you know everything you need to know. And then you got to step out of the cognitive function. And every single narcissistic abuse survivor will know that even though they have all this in-depth knowledge, they're still struggling with their mental health. They're still compromising on living their life the way they would, because they're avoiding triggers. So it gives this illusion that they are better because they feel safer having all of this knowledge. But they also need to realize that they actually altered their normal way of being to such an extent that it's very limiting, because, you're avoiding the triggers. So the recovery really needs to then be taken out of the cognitive function, because you cannot rationalize trauma away. And that's where we then dive deeper. And hypnosis, of course, is the perfect tool to facilitate that, because it allows us to step outside of the cognitive function, to access our unconscious mind, our inner wisdom, our inner resources, and really do work on a deep level, as deep as it was caused, because narcissistic abuse affects us emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically. It's so multi-layered. So as long as somebody keeps their recovery, it's not actually real recovery, in the cognitive function, you're not going to come out the other side. And then repeat trauma will become very, very common, because you know everything about narcissists, you know all the red flags, but then some other different shade of narcissist comes along, and we walk into the same trap again, because we actually haven't done the healing work that's necessary. Reprogramming faulty programs, that gets us into trouble over and over again. And that you have recovered when you are very authentic in yourself, when you have healthy boundaries in place, and when you actually don't have the emotional triggers anymore. Like, for example, I couldn't be doing the work that I'm doing if I hadn't undergone my healing first, because that's what actually allows me now to hold the space for somebody else, because I'm clean. If I hadn't done that, I would be working with somebody who, is working through their own narcissistic abuse journey, and it would emotionally trigger me, which then would obviously interfere with holding space, because all of a sudden I would feel anxious. I would have some sort of emotional reaction. So when you have undergone your recovery, what happens is that you're just very solid in yourself. You're very content. Your nervous system is very stable, and you have become very resilient. So then when actually life throws curveballs at you, which it always does, the way you can deal with those kind of situations, it's much more healthy. It doesn't send you in like an emotional meltdown as it would when you are in a highly activated state, as you would be when you come out of a narcissistic relationship, obviously.
And obviously it is multifaceted. There's going to be different kind of things, but is there, a crucial thing that almost has to happen to get to that point of healing? Because let's say in grief, you'd say, right, at some point you have to get to acceptance, in order to go through the grieving process. What would be the equivalent in narcissistic abuse recovery, where it's such a vital ingredient that healing is very difficult without that thing?
It's acceptance. It always is acceptance. And acceptance is one of the hardest things, like regardless of what it is that you're dealing with, what kind of challenge it is, just accepting that this is what it is, that's the status quo, and without judgment, letting it be that. That's necessary for any kind of change work you want to do. So grief and narcissistic abuse recovery, like the motions of grief and narcissistic abuse recovery, is actually not that dissimilar. I developed a framework which I call the Road to Recover Me, which is in my ebook, where it actually is based on the grief curve, because you go through the same thing, like the realization, the denial, and it's the same motions. And I think realizing that is incredibly powerful, because we tend to fight supposed bad emotions, and there are no bad emotions. And because there is so much overwhelm of grief and sadness, which has a very valid reason in narcissistic abuse, but that's what we then, when we are at that stage, really are fighting, when in reality, it's a very normal reaction to an incredibly abnormal situation. So we go through the same motions as we would when we grieve someone, but who we're actually grieving is ourselves. And I think that's also a huge realization, because we talked about death before. So we talked about a physical death. But remember when I said earlier, a big part of the narcissistic abuse is the very tactical erosion of identity. That actually, we witness our own death. That's what happens. And if somebody hasn't experienced narcissistic abuse and they're listening right now, they're like, what the heck is she talking about? But if somebody has experienced it, they know exactly what I'm talking about right now, because you're literally watching yourself die, and you look in the mirror and you don't recognize the person looking back at you. And I remember I was at a point where I literally asked myself, how am I sitting here still breathing when I have died? So I think that understanding helps both the survivor and people dealing with the survivor, whether that's family or whether that's a therapist, to really put that into context, because we wouldn't judge anyone who's grieving for a loved one either. We would hold space for them. We would allow them to go through the motions of grief. And the same applies when we're actually grieving ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's quite a powerful metaphor at some level, because you are grieving the version of you that you were, and if that took place over many, many years, that person, even if it felt very difficult to be that person. But, part of the acceptance is leaving that version in the past. A quick question, because I know you were going to do a bit of hypnosis or an experience for us. I don't know if it's just a perception again. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. But there is a belief, I think, that empaths attract narcissists. Is that just a misconception, or is there an element of truth to that?
No, that's true. And so if you think about it, an empath and a narcissist, they're basically two sides of the same coin, right? And that's also why it's so magnetic, actually, why they are so drawn to each other. And as an empath, we care deeply, we love deeply. And oftentimes we have a faulty conditioning from our upbringing, right? That we then end up sacrificing ourselves for the sake of love. And if we have a program like that running in the background, and until something happens, we are not aware of that at all, it's just always been that way. That obviously opens ourselves up to situations like that, because every narcissist has a sob story. And then what happens, and I did the same thing, and I did it so many times until it almost cost me my life. Let me save you with all this love I have to give. Let me convince you how lovable, how worthy you are. when actually this love we should direct at ourselves. And again, that opens us up to actually walking into the trap, because what does the narcissist do? They create this illusion, they match and mirror us to such an extent we actually fall in love with ourselves. And, they share the same insecurities, the same vulnerabilities, the same fears, the same dreams, supposedly. And that's how all of a sudden, very quickly, they become the soulmate. And then for the very first time, you then feel maybe seen or heard or worthy or lovable or good enough. And that's where the healing then also needs to really address that, because that's the carrot that a narcissist waves. And unless that part is healed, unless that need that wasn't met for all our lives actually is met from the inside out, that carrot will always be appealing, regardless of what kind of narcissist we are dealing with. So in my work, it's very important for me, because I'm an empath as well. But there is a way to actually be an empath, which is a beautiful thing. We wouldn't want to take that away, right? It's a beautiful quality to have, to love and to care about other people. But there is a way to keep all of that, but let go of everything that doesn't serve us, which actually allows us to be empathic, but in a healthy way without sacrificing ourselves. And that has to be the goal of narcissistic abuse recovery, because that's something we want to keep. If you think about it, if there were more empaths in the world, it would be a much better place. But unfortunately, the empath, they have faulty wiring as much as the narcissist, because they sacrifice themselves, they get themselves into trouble. And what deep healing work actually does is to really balance that out, and then be able to do fantastic things and to help other people, and doing it in a healthy way, without the suffering, and while still being very authentic with yourself.
Yeah, and having those boundaries to stop history repeating, I think, is also an important thing. We're both talking at the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference literally in a few weeks, I think about 4 weeks' time. I'm guessing you're talking about narcissistic abuse recovery there, and you have a post-conference workshop. Tell us a little bit of what people can expect from your talk there.
Yeah, so I will be giving an introduction into narcissistic abuse recovery. So the focus really is about the recovery. I'm not going to give a lecture about narcissists and how they work and how they think and how to figure them out, because it's not about them at all. So I will be sharing what narcissistic abuse really is, as we touched on already as well, what makes it so dangerous, how we can actually spot it in ourselves and in others. And I will give an intro into how we can then utilize hypnosis to actually facilitate the healing to help somebody come out the other side. So whether you are a survivor yourself, it will help you, that talk will help you to have an idea of what's actually available, and that there is a very practical solution available, and what you can expect when you work with a therapist, what to look out for also. But if you are a therapist, a coach, a hypnotherapist, medical professional, it really is intended to give you an idea how you can then facilitate a healing for your clients.
Perfect. And if anyone's interested in seeing Ronia and myself at the Irish Hypnotherapy Conference, the website is irishhypnotherapyconference.ie, so check that out. And Ronia, if people want to learn more about you, what's the best website they can go to?
My website is roniafraser.com, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram as well, Rock and Roll Coach Ronnie.
roniafraser.com and Rock and Roll Ronnie. Perfect. So we've got those places. We'll put them in the show notes as well. But you've got a bit of an experience which is going to keep us safe from negative energy. So talk us through that. I'm going to put myself on mute, and then it's over to you.
Okay, so what I would like to share with you is a really simple, nice little exercise. And the interesting thing about narcissistic abuse is we can try to rationalize it as much as we want, there is so much more happening there. And there is a very strong energetic connection between a narcissist and their victim. And especially if you are an empath, you know from your own experience how vulnerable you are to energy vampires. So what I would like to share with you today is how we can create an energetic protective shield that actually protects you from those energy attacks. And it's a very simple exercise, and I'm going to teach it to you today. And then you can do it as many times as you like for as many different purposes as you like. And I would like to invite you to just pause for a moment and go get like a ring, a necklace, maybe your glasses, maybe earrings, something that you wear that you can put on, and get something that doesn't have a meaning just yet. So not your wedding ring or something like that. If you don't have anything at hand right now, you can always listen to the replay, go and get something. And as I said, I will teach you how to do it, and then you can do it yourself as many times and for as many purposes as you need. So get your item of choice and then come back. Good. So now go ahead and place this item in your hand. And close your hand around this item, whether it's a ring or a necklace or bracelet or anything else. And really get a sense of that item in your hand. And you may want to close your eyes if that helps you. Really connecting with the item in your hand and get a sense of the form, the shape, the weight, the temperature. That's right. And what we are going to do now is we are going to place an energetic protective shield on this item. So every time you put it on, you will be protected from this negative energy. Now, for this purpose of today, I would like you to pick one very particular purpose that you would like to have energetic protection from. And that can be one particular person, or it can be narcissistic energy in general, or anything else. And really get really clear on what it is that you would like to feel protected from. And don't worry about it. You can create as many as you like. Good. And as you're clear on the purpose of this energetic protective shield that we are going to place on this item right now, go ahead and let this energetic shield expand from the item in your hand and surround you from the top of your head all the way down to the tips of your toes. And I don't know what color this protective shield has, but I do know that you can tweak it exactly how you need it. So go ahead and tweak the color, tweak the temperature, the strength of the shield, play around with it to make it feel right for you. That's right. And notice how much more protected you already feel. That's right. Very good. And then go ahead and let that shield collapse into the item that you're holding in your hand. Very good. And then expand and collapse. Expand, collapse. And really notice how you are in control here. And every time you expand, you can keep tweaking it as you like it. Expand, collapse. Expand, collapse. That's right. Very good. And then now go ahead and put that item on. So if it's a ring, put it on your finger. If it's a bracelet, put it on your arm, a necklace, put it around your neck. And then one more time, go ahead and expand this energetic protective shield around you. Take a deep breath in and really notice what you notice. That's right. And if you want, you can leave it activated. If not, and you don't need it right now, go ahead and let it collapse. And then you can take a deep breath in and open your eyes and come back to the room, knowing that you now have an energetic protective shield on this item of your choice, which you can activate anytime you need.
Ronia, that was amazing. Thank you so much for that. I now have a ring that protects me from judgment, so I'm going to use that whenever I feel like I need. So that's amazing.
What color was your shield?
You know, it was like a force field of almost kind of like, you know, those kind of like glass things that have like the electrical kind of things.
Oh,
it was kind of
wow.
like electrical kind of colors with like an energetic, kind of like a science fiction force field, something like that. So yeah, I could really picture it. So that was amazing.
Right.
Ronia, give us your website again for anyone that's listening that wants to check you out.
RoniaFraser.com.
Nice and easy to remember. Ronia, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
And to you at home, thanks for joining me today on The Hypnotist, and see you on the next episode soon.
Thank you for listening to The Hypnotist with Adam Cox, the show that gives you inside access to cutting-edge hypnosis with real clients facing genuine issues. To automatically receive the latest episodes, please subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, please share this episode with just one friend you think it could help. And if this episode helped you, please leave us a 5-star review.